Trigger warning. Gun violence, mass shootings, murder, and suicide are discussed in this episode. Viewer discretion is advised. Before this episode begins, we at Point of View want to express our deep sadness and disheartenment about the increasing number of gun-related violence in the United States and around the world. Unfortunately, since a new gun-related incident seems to be reported every day, some of the information you hear in this episode may be dated by the time you listen to it. However, we hope this episode can still serve as a jumping-off point for conversation, dialogue, and advocacy to combat gun violence in our world. Usually, this would be where a politician or public figure would offer their quote-unquote thoughts and prayers. The insincerity of these words has become blatantly obvious due to their overuse and lack of preventative action taken by those in power. While all those affected by gun violence are on our minds and in our prayers at Point of View, we want to see more. We want to see action, policy, and change. Enjoy the episode.
How are you, Nick?
Well, my leg pits are sweaty.
Your leg pits?
You know the backs of your legs?
Oh, like the back of your...
The backs of your knees, I guess.
Back of your knee. Your, your leg elbow.
They're wet.
Thanks.
I'm gonna dry them with my notes for this episode.
Your notes? Oh my god.
I just
So that's you are. You're wet? Is that what we're saying you are?
Just the backs of my knees. Guys, I'm single. So last night I went to Garth Brooks, but he... Oh my god!
What the heck was that?
That was the biggest bug I've ever seen in my life, and it was crawling on me. Oh my god.
That was the sound of true fear, folks.
Oh my god. I hated that. That was terrifying. And we got it on video and audio. Oh my god. I think that was a beat, too. I literally looked down at my knee and it was on me, and I screamed. Oh.
You don't need to describe it. We just witnessed it.
Well, you know what? We have our cold open. Oh my god. I, don't know what to do. Okay, now that I have fully moved locations, we are restarting this episode. Justin, how are you?
I am good. That was something. That was interesting. I hope we are able to share that video with people because I had no idea. That was the sound of true fear, folks. That was really...
It absolutely was. That was terrifying. I'm so glad we got it on video and we can absolutely share it. Let's do check-ins while my heart rate goes down.
Slows down. Yes.
And the bug is still up there, and I will not be going up there until my dad gets home and kills it. Yes, I am 24 years old. What'd you do this weekend?
Okay, I was waiting. I was gonna say, should I just talk or So today I got lunch with one of our friends, Scott Lombardo. Hello, Scott. Shout out to you. He was in the area because someone he graduated Loyola with was ordained into the priesthood yesterday. So he was in the area and we got lunch and that was really nice. I hadn't been able to see him in a very long time. So that was fun. But on Friday too, I went to an AJR concert. I don't know if you guys know who AJR is, but they sing Weak. I'm weak and what's wrong with that? Boy, oh boy, I don't know, something like that. And I went with my sister at the Xfinity Center, which for those who don't know is kind of like an outdoor amphitheater type of venue, which is really fun. And I hadn't been there since like 2017 actually. So it was a lot of fun except for the waiting in the parking lot for an hour after the concert because the way they built the lots, there's only one entrance. So that wasn't fun. But then I got Wendy's and sat in that drive-through for an hour. But it made up for it, I guess. So, yeah, it was a fun Friday night. I went with my sister. You all know Ashley. And
We've heard of her.
Yes, and that was a lot of fun. They were very good performers, too, I'll have to say. So I find that makes a concert a lot more entertaining versus someone who just sings, but they can also entertain and bring the audience, make them feel like they're a part of it, you know?
Yes. Bring them to their feet.
Well, yeah, exactly. What about you? How was your weekend?
So I also went to a concert. I went to Garth Brooks, and I will just paint this scene for you. First of all, I didn't want to be there. I already did not want to be there. But I still would have preferred to watch the first half of the show from my seat and not on a 3-mile walk. And what I mean by that is we did miss a big chunk of the beginning of the concert because parking and traffic getting into the show was abhorrent. It was horrible. We parked relatively close to, so we got my dad at 5:30 from work. This was his birthday gift. He likes Garth Brooks a lot. Got my dad at 5:30 from work, drove in. I think the show started at 8:30. We might have got there at 9. And we could hear Garth singing as we were walking into the stadium.
Hey, Garth.
With multiple, yes, hey Garth, how are you? With multiple other people, like you wouldn't have been able to tell that the show had already started if you couldn't hear it. That's how many people were walking in with us. But it was actually, I was pleasantly surprised. He did a really good job. I'm not a big country fan, but he still put on a really good show, and he was very gracious. You could tell he knew everybody on the team, from the tech team to his band to the backing vocalists, and he shared that with the crowd. He knew, like, for example, I don't know the name of the person, but he was like, this person was just inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or this person just won a Grammy, and he talked about how musicians that play on the studio record are different from the ones that go out on tour with you. He was just really cool. And something I learned about him when I got home is that he is a Republican, which I did not know. I'm not 100% surprised, but I did not know that. But he sang at the inauguration of Joe Biden. We believe, you and I talked about this before, he sang America the Beautiful. But he did it, he got a lot of backlash from a lot of his fans. A lot of his fans are conservative, and I believe he's from Tennessee. But he got a lot of backlash, but he said the reason he did it was in a show of unity. He was also asked to perform at Trump's inauguration, and he said he could not. Granted, he said it was for scheduling reasons, but he said he performed in the name of unity, and it's just something I really respect. Personally, I don't know if I were in his position and it was the opposite. For example, like if I was asked to perform in a Trump inauguration with my beautiful voice, I would have not done it. But those are for, obviously, I'm on the Democratic side of the political spectrum. But I thought that was cool that he was able to do that. And I want to believe that he did that to take a stance against hate and also to choose the right side of history. And I was impressed because I already knew that he has advocated for LGBTQ rights, which is monumental in country music, honestly. And he did it a long time ago. Like, I think it was in the 90s, which I think that's really cool. So yeah, that leads me a little bit into our conversation today.
Yeah, do you want to share what we're going to talk about today?
Yes, so basically we are going to be talking about gun violence in America and why it is a public health issue. And also what we can do to promote a change.
Yes, and 1968 is the earliest that the CDC, and the CDC keeps track of these type of statistics because gun violence, and you're going to talk about this, is considered a public health issue. So,
of course.
So in 1968 was the earliest that the CDC has online records for these types of things. But
okay,
a lot of what I'm talking about is going to be in more recent years, unless it's like comparing today versus way back when. So yeah, we wanted to talk about this. I mean, gun violence hasn't really been something that has slowed down in the United States, unfortunately. It's kind of been an issue that has gained a lot of media attention because of the rise in mass shootings. In fact, going from 2000, the year 2000, there were, and I don't want to say only because that makes it sound like, oh, there was only 3, but there were 3 mass shootings in 2000, and now we have an average of 40 mass shootings that happen annually in the year 2020, which is the last full year that we have full data about gun violence. So that just kind of puts it in perspective. Although I'll have to say mass shootings are only a fraction of the gun violence that occurs in our country, in the United States.
Yes.
They still are something that we have to acknowledge and have to take into account, because that is, someone going and killing a bunch of people just because, various reasons is just something that we have to talk about, So Nick and I felt like, yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, if it happens once, it's a tragedy.
Right.
And the fact that we're, as a country, have become numb to it now is a huge issue.
So I have a couple of facts about the situation here. So first off, how many guns are there in the United States? Well, the United States ratio is 120.5 firearms per 100 residents in the United States. So per 100 residents, there's 120.5 firearms. That's up from 88 per 100 in 2011 and far surpasses that of other countries around the world. And my sources, by the way, are the BBC and Pew Research Center. And they will, of course, be posted in the description of this episode. More recent data also suggests that gun ownership has grown significantly over the last several years. One study published by the Annals of Internal Medicine in February of 2022 found that 7.5 million U.S. adults, that's just under 3% of the population, became first-time new gun owners between January of 2019 and April of 2021. This, in turn, exposed about 11 million people to firearms in their homes for the first time, including 5 million children. About half of new gun owners in that time period were women, while 40% were either Black or Hispanic. A separate study published by the American Academy for Pediatrics in 2021 linked a rise in gun ownership during the pandemic to higher rates of gun injuries among and inflicted by children. Now, listen to that. Among children. So, injuries to children, but also inflicted by children, which could be anything from, a child is considered anyone who's, 0 to 17 years in the United States, right? So, either someone could have accidentally, fired a gun and hurt somebody, or, anything in between. A couple other facts here. In 2020, there were 45,222 gun-related deaths in the United States. To put that in perspective, Nick, that would be filling Orioles Park at Camden Yards with fans, completely selling it out, and then everyone in there dying. So that's how many gun deaths happened in the year 2020. That figure includes gun murders and gun suicides, along with 3 other less common types of gun-related deaths tracked by the CDC, which include unintentional, those that involved law enforcement, and those whose circumstances could not be determined. Nearly 53 people are killed each day in the United States by a firearm, according to this data. To kind of break up the first 2 categories that I talked about, gun murders and gun suicides, 54% of all gun-related deaths in the United States were suicides. That's 54% of all gun-related deaths. 43% were murders. To break that down a little bit further, in terms of the murders, 79% of U.S. murders in 2022 involved a firearm. That's the highest since 1968. And as I mentioned earlier, 1968 was the earliest that the CDC had record for tracking this type of data. To compare that, 79% of U.S. murders in 2020 involved a firearm. In other countries, only 4% in the UK involved a firearm, 37% in Canada, and 13% in Australia. talking about suicides, 53% of all suicides in the United States in 2020 involved a gun, and that percentage has remained pretty stable in recent years. A 2016 study published in the American Journal of Public Health found there was a strong relationship between higher levels of gun ownership in a state and higher firearm suicide rates for both men and women. Now, how have U.S. gun deaths changed over time? Well, as I mentioned earlier, 45,222 gun-related deaths happened in 2020. This was by far the most on record. This was a 14% increase from the year before, a 25% increase from 2015, and a 43% increase from 2010. Gun murders rose the sharpest, with a 4% increase from 2019, 49% increase since 2015, and 75% increase since 2010. Gun-related suicides also have been rising, climbing 10% since 2015 and 25% since 2010. Now, to briefly discuss the rates of gun deaths, which I talked about before, the how deaths have changed over time, and just the raw number doesn't necessarily account for how the population has changed, but the rates of gun deaths have also increased. Mississippi, Louisiana, Wyoming, Missouri, and Alabama have the highest rates of gun-related deaths, including murder, suicides, and the other categories mentioned before, while New York, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Hawaii
have the lowest. Not surprisingly, the first states I mentioned have some of the country's least restrictive legislation around firearms, while the latter states that I mentioned have some of the most restrictive laws on guns.
And again, all of these statistics and facts can be found in the sources in the description. So just from those stats, you can kind of see that I'm painting a little bit of a grim picture here, Nick. It's, again, tracked by the CDC because the United States does consider gun violence to be a public health issue in our country. And I understand that when you were doing your research, you found an article and some data around treating this issue as a public health issue.
Yes. So the report I found is called The Public Health Approach to Gun Violence Prevention, and it was published in November 2020 by the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence, and I found it on the Johns Hopkins website, the college. So before we really get into the report, I do just want to share what they shared at the beginning, which is the difference between public health and healthcare. So I'm going to read directly from it. People often assume that public health is the same as healthcare. While both strive to improve health and well-being, they approach this goal differently. In healthcare, the focus is on improving the health of the individual. In contrast, public health focuses on improving the health of an entire population through large-scale interventions and prevention programs. Public health works to address the many factors that determine the health and well-being of populations. These factors are often referred to as risk and protective factors. They are characteristics or behaviors in individuals, families, communities, and the larger society that increase or decrease the likelihood of premature death, injury, or poor health. The goal, basically, of public health is to maximize the overall health and well-being of the population. Gun violence, as you just detailed for us with all of the statistics, it's a public health epidemic that affects the well-being and public safety of all Americans, right? It can happen to anyone. We see it happening in movie theaters, schools, malls. I think
grocery stores.
Grocery stores was most recent, I believe. And that's enough to make it, in my opinion, that's enough to make it a public health issue. But before we get started, because when I have talked about gun violence in the past, I've said we just need to ban guns. We need to get rid of guns. Other countries don't have this issue. And I still would not be angry about not having guns, personally. I don't own them myself, but I just mean if America were to get rid of the guns in a perfect world, that would be okay with me. But having, done this research today, there are underlying causes of gun violence that wouldn't necessarily go away if we just got rid of guns. And I know that this issue has also become very, very politicized. So it's one side says get rid of the guns, one doesn't. I was listening to, I always have to relate, as you know, I always bring up pop musicians, but I was watching an acceptance speech that the artist Pink gave when she was awarded the People's Champion Award at the Billboard Awards in, I believe, 2019. And she said something along the lines of, I don't care about your politics, I care about your kids. And that is, I think that fits so well here, because kids are going to school and parents, you can assume that they're going to be safe, but you just don't know. And I guess that's the nature of just life and uncertainty. But the rates of, the amount of school shootings are much higher here, as you showed us, than they are in other countries. That said, in the past couple of weeks, and I just want to point out that I am jumping back in here, it is June 4th, so this is another amendment, but in the past couple of weeks, I've seen posts from people in other countries saying, we have a lot of the same issues, mental health issues, we play the same video games, we listen to the same music, and we don't have the death rate by gun that America does. And so what's the difference? The difference is they regulate their guns. We really don't do a great job of that at all, clearly. And I agree with them. So I guess this is kind of an example of, we speak our truth to learn the truth. I'm kind of learning as we go. But I don't know. I think that, yes, the answer is stricter gun laws and gun control in America. And also, there are underlying causes of these shootings that also need to be addressed. Once again, back to 2 weeks ago. It's not just a gun issue, right? Because if we get rid of guns, that doesn't get rid of domestic violence. If we get rid of guns, that's going to probably decrease it, but we're still going to have suicides. If we get rid of guns, we're still going to have police brutality. Like, there are other issues intertwined and underlying to this
absolutely, yeah,
massive issue. So the public health approach, outlined by the CDC and the World Health Organization, has 4 steps. So do you have because I just said a lot, do you have any comments on that?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't necessarily think that, in some cases, guns, yes, are the issue, but I think a lot of the reason why there is gun violence is because of other things that are going on. I think guns, what their role is they exacerbate anything that might be going on, right? Like a mental health issue that someone might be experiencing, or a domestic violence type of situation, or anything like that. It just, having a gun in the vicinity can quickly escalate a situation that is already bad.
Right. And so I agree. And I really like what you said about the guns exacerbating the problem. And I do want to reiterate that I am very anti-gun, but I was just, in terms of going through this research and going through this report, and because at this point, I'm not, like I said, I don't see it as this side. It's just, I think that honestly, the safety of kids and the safety of us as adults too is something that I hope all parties can come together and agree that that's something that we all want, right? Like, that's, I would hope. But
yeah, and later on too, I'll talk about how you talked about how it's become a political issue, and it very much is a political issue in the United States.
Of course.
And I'll talk about who is in support of gun control, who is opposes gun control, and I'll talk about both sides.
Yes. So I want to go through quickly the 4 steps to this public health approach. So the first step, defining and monitoring the problem. So we talked, there are many types of gun violence, and they require different solutions, as we kind of touched upon a second ago. But this step is all about collecting the data. Distributing reliable firearm data is essential to combating gun violence through a public health approach. So the report talked about how data should include the demographic of the victim and the shooter, location and the time of shooting, type of violence that occurred, that type of thing. But this was the part that I found most interesting and agreed with a lot, was that data should be made widely available and easily accessible to the general public. And I think that's super important, because we talk about education and how that levels of education can combat other issues that are intertwined, such as racism, all of that, right? We've talked about it with homophobia, transphobia. Education is power, right? And knowledge is power, and it keeps us safe. But what I also wanted to say there is it's kind of like seeing is believing when we publish all of this information, because there's a lot of, oh, we should take guns away, we shouldn't take guns away, and that makes it a very binary discussion. But I feel like seeing adds to believing. So I do agree with all of that, but I really resonated with the making the information available to all. The second step was identify risk factors and protective and preventative factors. So basically focuses on prevention and identifies specific risk factors at the community and societal level, as well as the individual level. So, for example, individual level, having a gun in one's home. So the report, and we can link the report and we can link all of its sources, but it mentioned that having a gun in one's home doubles the chance of dying by homicide and increases the likelihood of suicide death by over 3-fold.
I don't think our founding fathers knew how deadly guns could become. Not saying that those guns weren't deadly, but you know what I'm saying. Right.
But now, yeah. So that was like the individual level. On the community level, the report talked more about the underlying issues and their presence. So under-resourced neighborhoods, high concentrations of poverty, lack of economic opportunity, discrimination, anybody who is faced with those challenges are more likely to experience higher rates of violence. And these community level factors are often the result, as it mentioned, of deep structural inequities rooted in racism. Okay, so at the same time, when it comes to the mass shootings in schools, in malls, a lot of that is due to just toxic masculinity, and a lot of the times it's a white man with his ego bruised that ends up acting out in a racist and hateful way, or a homophobic and hateful way. So I just wanted to add that too, because that's a huge underlying issue as well. Okay, so the third step in this public health approach is to develop and test prevention strategies for gun violence. So it talked about the foundation for effective gun violence prevention being universal background checks and making it a law that is the standard, as well as ensuring that each person who seeks to purchase a firearm undergoes a background check prior to the purchase, supplemented by a firearms licensing system. So those regulate and track the flow of firearms to ensure that they don't make it into the hands of prohibited individuals. Now, so do you have any thoughts on the whole, well, we shouldn't, because there's been a lot of talk of like, well, if we have gun control, like if we have stricter rules on guns, people who are going to use them to harm other people, like they're going to get them anyway, even if they can't get them legally, like they're just going to get them illegally. What are your thoughts on that? Because I've heard that argument a bunch. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I don't think there's any harm in making it more difficult for someone who wants to perpetrate violence, because I think that's what it will do. The report,
I found this really interesting, said research shows that when individuals are required to undergo a background check and obtain a license to purchase a firearm, far fewer firearms are diverted into illegal markets. So that was interesting to me too. So it's like, yeah, maybe the people who are doing illegal things with guns and getting them illegally are going to continue to get them that way. But the people who are, registering, like it kind of talked about how there was less of a chance that those guns would then make it into the hands of the wrong people.
Right. It's like doing the right thing, which I hesitate to say the right thing because, in my opinion, gun violence. I'm freaked out by guns. I mean, Ryan
Me too.
Ryan can tell you about this. I went and visited him a couple months ago, and he was skeet shooting. He's like, "You want to try?" And I was like, "I'm good." And I was just kind of in awe watching him skeet shoot. But I think people who want to buy a firearm for, say, self-defense or whatever, what have you, and they're not going to do nefarious things like perpetuate a mass shooting, then I think there's nothing. They won't have issue with just okay, background check this, this, and this, because it is a potentially deadly piece of machinery that you are purchasing.
Yeah, I would never want a gun. I wouldn't trust myself with a gun just in the way that I don't know what to do with it.
You could literally ask Ryan. I was like, oh my god, a gun.
That's what I'm saying.
So
I would
funny.
never, I would never do, first of all, I wouldn't want to do anything to anybody.
And acknowledging our bias here for this episode is just this bias, is where we stand.
Yeah.
But
yeah, our bias and also just my like lack of knowledge about I would just be afraid to have one in the house for the fear that it would like go off without touching it. Which like I don't think that's how guns work, but I'm not gonna lie, I don't know. But anyways, the last step of this system to prevent gun violence is to ensure widespread adoption of effective strategies. So it talks about how, and this is we would know this just from common sense. These prevention policies are only effective if they're properly implemented, and also in an equitable manner. So historically disenfranchised. This part I found really important, and I wanted to make a special note of this. Historically disenfranchised groups should be involved in the implementation process to make sure public health strategies do not have unintended consequences. Basically, so the public health approach includes a focus on allocating funds for implementing and evaluating these gun violence prevention strategies at the federal, state, and also local levels. So I just said a lot of things. Do you have any thoughts, comments?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. If we're going to treat gun violence like a public health issue, we should treat it like anything. Like for COVID, you're going to have to follow those 4 steps in order for it to be an effective prevention and treating platform. I'm very much a visual learner, so I don't have the 4 steps in front of me. I know that 2 was community, 1 was individual, 4 was effectively implement. What was number 3?
4 was effectively implement. Number 3 was develop and test prevention strategies.
Yeah, and I think that's a good blueprint for a lot of different things, and I think that the way you outlined it accurately, we can see how it can apply to this issue.
Thank you.
So I said that I would give some statistics about mass shootings because those tend to be the incidences of gun violence that get the most attention in the media because, well, they are horrific. Not that any other gun violence is less than or more than, but mass shootings do get a lot of media attention both on TV and on social media and other different platforms. So let's talk about that a little bit. First off, this is a kind of a difficult question to answer. What is a mass shooting? Because there is no single agreed upon definition in really any source. The FBI collects data on active shooter incidents, which is defined as one or more individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. So for the sake of simplicity, let's go with the active shooter incidents definition for mass shootings. The FBI found an increase in active shooter incidents between the year 2000 and 2020 rise from 3 to 40, as I mentioned in the earlier in the episode. In the United States, the Las Vegas, Nevada shooting in 2017 was the deadliest in U.S. history and still holds that spot. It killed more than 50 people and left 500 people wounded. Regardless of the definition being used, fatalities and mass shooting incidents in the U.S. account for only a small fraction of all gun murders that occur nationwide each year. Now, let's talk a little bit about what types of firearms are used in these incidents. So, in 2020, handguns were involved in 59% of the 13,620 U.S. gun murders and non-negligent manslaughters for which data is available, according to the FBI. Rifles, the category that includes guns sometimes referred to as assault rifles or assault weapons, were involved in 3% of firearm murders. Shotguns were involved in 1%, and the remainder of gun homicides and non-negligent manslaughters, 36%, involved other kinds of firearms or those classified as type not stated. Now, it's important to note that the FBI statistics do not capture the details on all gun murders in the U.S. each year, but the FBI's data is based on information voluntarily submitted by police departments around the country, and not all agencies participate or provide complete information each year. So this information is not complete by any means, and that is something that in the U.S., I think should be standardized, a reporting of gun-related incidents, so that there is data to just more accurately paint a picture of how bad of an issue this is in our country.
Yes, that goes back to what I was saying about kind of making it more palpable, right? And being less of a just, oh, that'll never happen to me, or
giving the information, giving
idea.
people information and access to information.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, to finish up what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about different laws that can be passed to help the gun violence issue in the United States, and then I'm going to talk about who supports these types of laws and who tend to oppose these types of laws. So what I found, and I'm no expert here, but during my research I found that there were 3 different types of laws. There were background check laws, which Nick talked about how in order to purchase a firearm and receive a permit, you have to go through X amount of background checks, and those vary per state. There are permit and licensing laws. Permits are for those who are purchasing the firearm. Licensing laws are for those who are selling the firearms. And that can vary as well per state. And then there are bans, outright bans. So those are the 3 types, right? We have background checks, permit and licensing laws, and we have bans. That's Justin's summary of 3 different types of laws that can be passed at both the state level as well as federal level to help with the decrease of gun violence. Now, who tends to support these types of laws? Well, despite widespread and vocal public outrage, often in the wake of gun violence, American support for stricter gun laws in 2020 actually fell to the lowest level since 2014, according to polling by Gallup. Only 52% of Americans surveyed said they wanted stricter gun laws, while 35% said they should remain the same. 11% surveyed said that laws should be made less strict, actually. The issue is also one that is hyper-partisan and extremely divisive, as Nick and I have previously said. Now, they tend to fall largely along party lines, with Democrats nearly unanimous in their support for stricter gun laws. The same Gallup study noted this, with 91% in favor of stricter gun laws. Only 24% of Republicans, on the other hand, agreed with the same statement. That is, stricter gun laws are important, or rather are in favor of stricter gun laws. And 45% of independent voters are in favor of stricter gun laws. Some states have actually taken steps to ban or strictly regulate ownership of assault weapons, and laws vary by state, as I mentioned, but California, for example, has banned ownership of assault weapons with very, very, very limited exceptions. Now, who opposes gun control? Despite years of financial woes and internal strife, the National Rifle Association, or the NRA, still remains the most powerful gun lobbyist in the United States, with a substantial budget to influence members of Congress on gun policy. In January 2022, the NRA filed for bankruptcy as part of a fraud case against some of its own senior staff. But even after the move, it vowed to continue confronting anti-secondary amendment activities, promoting firearm safety and training, and advancing public programs across the United States. Over the last several election cycles, it and other organizations have consistently spent more on pro-gun rights messaging than their rivals had in the gun control lobby. Finally, a number of states have also gone as far as to largely eliminate any restrictions on who can carry a gun. In June of 2021, for example, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed into law a permitless carry bill that allows the state's residents to carry a handgun without any license, permit, or training. So this is kind of the picture of where we are politically in the United States. And yes, a lot of different federal regulations can be passed, but really, even if federal regulations don't pass, states have the power to make a lot of change. And in the example that I gave of California has done that, and then in the case of Texas, they have gone the other way. And so here's the picture that we have, and like any political issue in the United States, it is hyper-polarized. So, Nick, what are your initial thoughts after hearing that?
So, again, when we talk about it with respect to, like, different political parties, I see it as, okay, we say like, yeah, one side thinks that we should have stricter gun laws or ban guns altogether. One side believes that you should just be able to, or no, that we shouldn't have stricter gun laws, or the opposite extreme where you should just be able to carry whenever, like the handgun law in Texas, which is horrible, in my opinion. Sorry. I don't know. I see it as more of a, like, yeah, those two sides have different opinions, but when you think about, like, the issue of just, we want less deaths, of, like, less murders in the country, like, I would think that both parties would want to come together and solve that, be it through gun, I don't know what that entails. Is it getting rid of guns? Personally, I don't think that's just the end-all, be-all issue. I definitely think it would lower the rate of violence and, and death, but I don't think it would completely, like, I think there's more underlying cause. I know there's more to it than just that. So we have to come at it from all angles, but I really do believe that both sides can come together to at least agree that we want less. Absolutely. If not for, yeah.
Absolutely. And it's not just black and white, too, right? When I said that 91% of Democrats are in favor of stricter gun laws and 24% of Republicans are, according to this Gallup poll, are in 2020 Gallup poll are in favor of stricter gun laws, and 45% of independent voters are in favor of stricter gun laws, right? So it is gray, and it seems like it's an impossible issue to meet to find common ground on, but there are members of both parties that are more moderate or are willing to have conversations about this, and I think that's where we can kind of find or start to have solutions to the gun violence issue in our country, is finding common ground and meeting people where they are and saying, okay, let's talk about why are you in support of gun control, why are you against gun control, let's talk about this and see if we can, we both want universal background checks, then let's pass something about universal background checks. And so it's starting that conversation in the Congress.
Yeah, or we both want less, not to be graphic, but this is what I mean, like, we both want there to be less shootings of, like, kids in elementary school. Like, let's come, because that's what I mean. Like, when we view it that way, like, to be honest, if that weren't happening and people weren't dying from gun violence, I wouldn't care if someone had a gun. Like, I genuinely wouldn't. Do what you want, like, for recreational purposes, yeah, go have fun. But, like, that's not I don't actually care about, like, you own a gun, you don't own a gun. I care about basically the public safety.
Right, and that's where it gets into different causes, right? It's what is the cause of the person that wanted to go into a school and shoot it up? Was it the mental health? Was there larger, broader things going on at home? Was it then all of these different things led to, okay, he had access to a gun or she had access to a gun, although it tends to be men who perpetrate this type of mass shootings.
It goes back a lot to our conversation about, toxic masculinity.
Right, and then, like, because of all these issues, then he had access to a gun, and that exacerbated it. So that's at least on Capitol Hill, I find that's where the debates are kind of happening, because it's rights, but also public health issue and limiting deaths, but also what is the cause of it, and that's where the debate goes on. Healthy debate, but not talking about it is unhealthy.
Yes,
which is why we're talking about it this episode.
Yes, I want to talk about the public health pyramid that the report champions, I guess. It has 3 different layers, and there are, sub-layers in between. Like, there are in between the 3, but the top of it talks about narrowly tailored interventions that work with individuals, so on the individual level, to mitigate gun violence. So,
and Nick, to clarify, the top of it is the smallest part of the pyramid?
Yes. Okay. And to be honest, it doesn't really matter. It's not, I guess it does, but I just think of it as 3 parts, and this is kind of like the surface level of how to fight gun violence. For lack of it, that's a poor choice of words, but the top of it, it's examples.
You know how to find humor in everything.
No, I wasn't even trying to, but so narrowly tailored interventions that work with individuals to mitigate gun violence. So examples of that are lethal means safety counseling, violence intervention programs. All of these basically, or both of these, provide tools to support and change behavior, but it's still kind of on the individual to take action. right? And to decide that they don't want to do these things. It's like the whole leading a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. The middle of the pyramid requires less individual action. It's more about laws and policies that change the environment within communities to mitigate the risk factors. So examples being what I talked about earlier a little bit, universal background checks and firearm licensing. And I talked about how research shows that when individuals are required to undergo the background checks, it makes it less likely that the guns will get into the hands of people that shouldn't have them. And then the bottom of the public health pyramid, it focuses more on conditions within society that lead to the poor health outcomes like violence, or like gun violence. So those are racial disparities, inequality, inequity, poverty, inadequate housing, and lack of education, right? So policies, the report talked about policies that reduce these root issues hold enormous potential to reduce gun violence. So that's why they're like the deepest. That's why they're bottom of the pyramid. It's digging the deepest and kind of finding the root causes. But they require a much broader collective effort to achieve, and they also, on that note, require minimum individual effort to be effective at reducing gun violence. It's more of a structural thing. It quite literally, because it's the bottom of the pyramid, but also just, But I also think that a lot of it, like we talk about the education piece, and the violence intervention programs, but I think we've talked about this before, like there's a lot of unlearning that needs to go on from privileged groups too. And I think that can happen at all three levels. So the note that I made, at the top, that, the individual commitment is commitment to education, equity, whereas the middle of the pyramid would be laws protecting minorities and anti-discriminatory laws, right? The bottom, in my opinion, would be laws that ensure the most economically privileged are taxed at higher rates than those who cannot afford to be. I think this is, of course, relative. There was something very interesting that this report shared, and it talked about the public health success of car safety in the last 50 years, which I thought was very interesting. Apparently that is the greatest public health success that America has achieved. I did not know that. So it used the same, when the U.S. was looking at, deaths by car accident, it used the same thing, the Comprehensive Public Health Program, or an approach to it, and in doing so, the U.S. per mile driving deaths were reduced by 80% from 1967 to 2017. So there is a push to use that same system, basically, to combat gun violence. So what does that mean? Well, there are a bunch of steps that include, I'll just list them quickly: allocate, regulate, licensing, registration, prohibit risky people, manufacturing standards, age requirements, license renewal, ongoing monitoring and regulation, and liability. So, for example, I'll do the first one, allocation. Preventing car crashes, allocate funds to study the epidemic of motor vehicle crashes. When it comes to preventing gun deaths, it would be allocating funds to the CDC and other organizations to research gun violence. Go to the next step, then regulate. It would be allowing federal agencies to regulate firearm manufacturers and ensure gun safety. Right, and it just goes down the list. Like registration would be pass firearm registration laws to ensure that firearms are registered at each point of sale.
That's a really interesting parallel that you make, though, taking how far we've come in terms of increasing vehicular safety, and using that kind of as inspiration, blueprint? Maybe for blueprint or inspiration for how to create gun safety in the United States. How do we make it safer? Right, and I think that's a really unique. I really do like that parallel.
I do too. I found it very interesting.
So let's open up the conversation. What, after hearing all of this, I can answer first, Nick. But what are your thoughts? I mean, my thoughts are this. What fact? Right, fact is an increase in guns is linked to an increase in gun-related injuries, and that was proven in the sources that I use for my research. And so I think, do we need to ban guns? No. Do we need to necessarily have wartime weapons in non-wartime areas? No, I don't think that's necessary. And if you're using a gun for self-defense, if you're using a gun to go hunting, I don't necessarily think you need an assault rifle. I also think that training and background checks is super important. And to be honest, there is bipartisan support for universal background checks in safety. It's just a matter of prioritizing these types of laws and passing them. And I feel like if we're able to make little steps as we go, then we will learn more, one, about what makes someone want to use a gun and perpetuate violence, and what works and what's not. I don't think that the answer falls on one side of the debate or the other. I think it falls somewhere in the middle, and that's where I think conversation is so important. But what are your thoughts, Nick?
So I guess right now I have two bottom lines. My first is that there just needs to be a commitment on that individual level and on that community and societal level to education and public safety. I really think that simplifies a lot of it. And I mentioned before there are multiple underlying causes to violence, not just gun violence in America. But I think to sum it up, that there just needs to be a commitment to public safety, which is investing in combating all of the examples that I gave earlier. The other thing that I keep coming back to is throwing out this party believes this party believes this, because I talk a lot, as you know, about like things not being black and white, things being very gray, and nothing is certain. I've said this like 3 times now, but I think that the issue here is not even, like, I guess it's a sub-issue. It's I want guns for this. I'm against guns. I'm not against guns. I really do think that both parties can come together to say, I want less violence and I know there are extremists on, I'm sure, both sides, but the well-intentioned American, no matter what their political stance, I believe wants less school shootings and less fear.
Yeah.
I guess. You shouldn't have to fear going to the movies.
Absolutely. And it's terrible to think that you talk about the movies. Every time I go to a movie, no matter if it's packed or if it's 1054 Bad Guys children's movie that you went to see, I always, ever since the Aurora, Colorado shooting, when there was a movie theater shooting I think it was the Dark Knight screening.
It was. I think it was too.
I always find, whenever I'm in a public place where there's lots of people, I figure out what is my escape strategy if someone came in here with a gun. And that should be the back of my mind. But it right. Unfortunately is in the forefront of my mind. Mm-hmm. And so we wouldn't be Point of View if we didn't talk about what can you do. So talking about Nick's individual level, step 1 of the public health approach, what can you do as a listener? Well, learn more about gun violence and gun safety in the United States or your country by doing research on your own. You can look at the resources that Nick and I used, and also we encourage you to do your own research. We definitely did not cover everything that could be talked about in this conversation. We could probably go on for hours and hours and hours, but let this be the start of a conversation, right? Learn something, do some of your own research, have a conversation with someone that you love, someone that you care about, and see what they think. The second thing you can do is you can contact your local or state representatives if you live in the United States and share your thoughts and feelings about gun violence and gun safety with them. These are the types of people that can actually pass regulations that Nick and I talked about at the federal and state levels. So that's also something you can do, and Nick and I can share links on how to do that or a script of some kind, but definitely reach out to your local, state, and federal representatives. Finally, you can donate money. You can donate funds to organizations like Everytown for gun safety or March for Our Lives, which work towards advocating for gun safety legislation. So if maybe you're uncomfortable contacting your own representatives, you can work with them. You don't necessarily have to donate, but you can learn more from their websites, which we'll include in the description of this episode as well. And they'll do the advocating, not necessarily for us, because at an individual level, we definitely have to be a part of the solution. But these are organizations who are working day in and day out to hopefully increase gun safety in the United States.
Yes.
And so with that, Very heavy episode. Don't worry, next week is very light.
Very light.
Very light.
Both funny and relaxing somehow.
We'll leave it at that.
I don't think we've ever done a relaxing episode until now. So stay tuned for that.
Until then, my name is Justin Dew.
And I think I'm Nick Gervasi.
And you can reach us at our email, pointofviewpodcast@gmail.com, or by sending us a voice message on our website, anchor.fm/pointofview. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Point of View Podcast and Twitter at Point of View. If you enjoy our show, give us a rating or review in the Apple Podcast Store or share us with a friend or family member. We really appreciate it and are truly grateful for all of your support. As always, we hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you for listening, and until next time.
Paper, we wrote down our stories. We help you to decide. Will they will see the end, of course.